Welcome back. This is Peer Review, where we talk about all the pseudo-science and quackery we can get our hands on. I'm your host, Torsten Weber, with 30 years of medical training and practice, and like every show, my job is to make sure you're not following some of these stupid things told to you by top media channels, movies, and just bad science from books, tradition, whatever else. It's just plain junk and doesn't work. And normally, I have to search the annals of insanity to pull up the worst pseudoscience in the history of mankind. The people we normally follow, they need introductions, and even though they're popular in their own circles, pop culture has not been their friend, and many people don't know who they are or even the heroes that they support or have been supported by them. Well, today is certainly different. If you've been tuned into television lately, especially certain areas on the East Coast, you may have heard about this problem that's been sweeping those areas. We're going to work on how to explain it, but I don't know how to really go over it in a short form. So whatever it is, we are at the leading edge of it. We have an illness that drives people completely insane, makes them fearless, mindless, and almost completely immune to pain. There's so little info that the CDCs and others have said little, and our Surgeon General, who has literally been completely useless from the very beginning, he's just not giving us any information that can help us in any way move forward. So based on that thinking, we're going to once again take up the job of doing the research ourselves and figuring it all out from ground zero and letting you know the best thing to do and what this all entails for you. Remember that, as always, all this is just conjecture. It's based on the information we have available. I haven't performed any actual research regarding this illness. I haven't performed any autopsies. I haven't done any research reports. So I don't know if this is bacterial, viral, fungal, or vegetable, like most of you couch potatoes out there watching right now. But just to let you know, nothing replaces a thorough examination by a licensed professional. So if you do have a problem, seek one out and do the necessary steps that you have to take care of this stuff on your own. Once we've got that out of the way, we can just start. So first thing you want to do as a researcher is we're going to want to find the source of an illness. And I know many of you have heard that word, patient zero. In technical terms, this is called the index patient, the first case. And even though I'm going to get criticized by a lot of my fellows using that term, I think it hits the nail better than just saying contact tracing, which a lot of people out there are not familiar with. So, but bear with me here, because it's going to become clear why I'm going that direction in a second. What most people want to do is kind of find that point of origin. They want to point a finger, or they want to say this person or thing or wherever is at fault. So, but instead, I think the first primary areas we'd like to target, which is not just one person, is saying Pittsburgh or somewhere in the central Georgia by the report. So there's multiple areas that we're dealing with here of where that first area started reporting problems at. Most people hear the story of the Morgan Pittsburgh that these guys broke from, and also a hospital in Atlanta. But I don't think those were the first cases at all. It's important to remember that many of these illnesses, they don't start off one way or the other. They mutate, they become bigger, they become more advanced over time. And those things can go from what you're used to of saying they get bigger, they get more powerful, or in most cases they dilute or they become less effective over time. If anybody out there has done any research, I know this isn't something that's new to you. For instance, in the case of tuberculosis, the first people to have it would have actually tested negative to what we call tuberculosis today. So I think we have the same problems here. We've seen multiple cases of crazy people doing this, but something I've noticed from all the footage I've seen is something that nobody's really talking about, and that sets the whole thing apart. Is I don't think they're attacking people. I think they're devouring people. So what we did was I want to do some more research in that line. I wanted to check about other places where you see these devouring concepts going on and kind of draw things together from that area. And that was kind of my way of ruling out things that were different in different areas to say, okay, what is consistent here that is not consistent elsewhere? So in my line of work, I get a lot of unedited imagery, and it baffles me that nobody has picked up on it yet. Or maybe civil defense just doesn't want to say it. But these injuries are bite wounds. And sure, there are some scratches and other things, but the truth is they are bite wounds. So if we look back, we can see cases like this pop up over and over. So the first question that a lot of people asked me on that was, once we started to see a backlog of cases that were very similar in structure, a lot of different connections that came together, was asking things like, was this from a drug? Was it an illness? A lot of that we can't really deduce from that thinking. But the main question I actually got, funny enough, was asking if this was something that I thought was engineered. So I am going to get to that. I know I even hated saying it or even hearing the question. But I think that there's a lot of, goes back to this miscommunication, or this, I don't want to use the word quackery here, because I think the people that brought this information had a good place that they came from, but a lot of confusion on how they put it together. So this is exactly what medical professionals came to the conclusion on, and I think that's why they first blamed drugs such as xylazine. So if we're going to search back, that leads us to kind of those drug centrals. So places like Afghanistan, Russia, etc., maybe even China. But we haven't heard too much from them, other than we have heard something from China, but they've been good really about keeping things under wraps. And I don't think this is something that can really stay quiet for very long. So if it is being kept under wraps by them, they're doing an incredible job of it. So if it's truly drug related, though, I would think we would have heard more about it, especially in places like Texas, where we see a lot of these drugs that would be associated with xylazine coming into the country. Texas ends up being kind of a midway point there, or even maybe Florida. And that's the thing is some of these things work out, but they don't work out 100%. So I checked. I've never seen one descriptive coming from Texas. I have seen some similar symptomology, but I'm not 100% sure that this is drug related from what I'm seeing. So that being said, a source of China, Atlanta, and Pittsburgh, it doesn't make much sense when it comes to being a targeted attack. In other words, if we say, let's say that it's not drugs, maybe that it really was some sort of targeted thing. I mean, let's not rule out terrorism per se about doing that. So let's keep that all these different things in a mix from saying it was engineered or organized. But it didn't make sense of being a targeted attack. It doesn't sound like an environmental thing either. And maybe the drugs are exacerbated by the issue, but I think the claim that the homeless and drug areas are most susceptible is true regardless of what illness we're talking about. So truthfully, I think this illness has been hanging around for months. I think it may have been waiting for its opportunity, and that was its chance to break free and evolve. So again, I don't think this is something that where we were looking at something that someone has specifically orchestrated and put together. I think that what we see here, it wouldn't be feasible from that. If you want to do an attack, you would do these points are too random for that kind of thing. So I really think that whatever were happening, it has to be happening randomly. It has to be happening from a position of just opportunity. There has to be a moment in this time where it says, I'm going to grow up and be a big disease now, and I'm going to move along to everybody that I can come into contact with. So that's really been the biggest question for me is, Where does that happen when it comes to this thing that happened in Pittsburgh? So the original case that we heard from Pittsburgh was a morgue, and we had multiple people that were inside of this morgue that started to have the problems that they had, that there were police that were submitted to the area, and at the time of them breaking in, these people broke out, and they attacked the police officer, and then we had the problems that we had with that. I don't see anything in that area. I don't believe that was per se the first incidence of things happening. I think it was something almost like a secondary thing. It just seemed like something else had to be involved in that. And then what's really weird about that too was with the Atlanta cases. The Atlanta case really came from a rural area. That area was an injured person that came in. It was in a hospital setting, at which point a nurse was attacked, and that's where the first signs in Atlanta that we heard came forward. So two different perspectives: city, rural, very, very, very random. So it's very hard for us to kind of lynch it in that way to say that we want to get the information that we need and pull it to a place where we can gather it together. There's so much random factor there. So I'm going to move over to say, let's look at the signs and the symptoms. So what we're seeing is the main phase of the illness, which is indicated by high fever, lethargy, and then there's a prodromal phase that normally would move to the main illness phase. But that phase seems to be the worst of all. And when we move to the illness phase, it seems to destroy the person's higher brain function. To surmise, you'd think that the cerebrum is either dead or on its way to it. The cerebellum may or may not have suffered damage, and I believe that the areas of the brain that is still functional but is simply running on automatic, so to speak. The brainstem would be the only location that doesn't suffer some sort of damage, and it has to still function in some way to keep the body running. What we're hearing is that sections of the brain are actually damaged and showing signs of necrosis in all of the various areas. One's more significant than other, obviously. Like the brainstem was actually showing damage that, to me, didn't make a lot of sense. That's a little odd, since those areas would have to still function for heart, lungs to continue to feed organs. It could be in a more relaxed or limited state, if you say. Some people can actually function in lower areas, so that they only need a certain amount of energy, especially if their upper brain isn't functioning. It would be something along the lines of saying your body's going to take that oxygen and any energy that it has and push it to areas that are most needed. So if it didn't feel that those higher brain functions were needed, it simply did not move anything to that area, and that could be what we're seeing. Still, we see people with extreme physical damage that are effectively still functioning, and what we're not seeing is something like encephalitis. Something does happen to the fluid and the membranes that surround the brain and the spinal cord, but I'm not sure if I want to call that meningitis right now, in a traditional sense at least, and I think that's a good place that further research should be advanced, and that's something I wish I had access to. As for the victim, once they flip the switch, as I've heard many call it, the person is in the full throes of this disease. They lose all reason. They lose the ability to speak other than growls and grunts. They can't recognize loved ones, and they will attack anyone that they come in contact with. And I think with the intention to eat their victim, sort of a primal need to feed. Their movement is slow and erratic but deliberate. And when outside the presence of others, they may walk or even stand motionless. We've seen most develop a milky or reddening of the eyes. I think that some of that may not be indicative of first signs. So that may be something that may be more advanced. So I don't want to say that that's going to be something that is 100%. You're going to see it in every case. These other symptoms and signs are more prevalent, and I think that would be a better route to go. But I think if you're going to say, if you're going to take action against somebody who's attacking you, that leaving the milky and ready as is an option to say, hey, that puts it over the edge or not, or I think the responsiveness thing there is kind of huge, but in the same respect, there's positions where people maybe can't talk, or maybe they're in an injured state, and it's one of those things of why we have said over and over again not to take the action unless you're completely sure. And a few reports have seen them begin to bunch or collect with others. And I'm going to call this a sort of herd mentality. And I think that's something that's prevalent in human beings in general. And it is a higher brain function sort of situation, or maybe it's just the nature of the animal itself. Every animals out there have this mentality about coming together. So we have this kind of lizard brain get together survival technique. So even though I still believe that's more of a higher brain function there's certain things that help communities survive, and it could be for protection as well as such as possibly for searching for food. I think that's one of the problems we're going to run into is somebody that doesn't have these higher functions, doesn't understand the search for food, and that's something that we as humans have kind of we take that for granted, because we go out and get our own food, and then if you went to a brain state where you aren't able to have those higher brain functions to kind of figure out where to go to eat for the weekend, there are certain things that don't happen. So there is a feasibility that there are some other functionalities that are going on in the background. Does that mean that somebody's going to wake up and start seeing somebody for different issues? You can actually talk. I think that's a huge misconception for people, and I think you don't want to do that. I don't think you want to go to somebody and say, hey, by the way, maybe they'll just snap out of it kind of thing. This isn't like a brain injury where somebody has, for instance, they crash and, they pop out of it like a coma. That's not an option here. So, as for the contagion, that's been confirmed, but the method that we have is still under question. So you can capture this from somebody else, but the method in which that happens is still up for debate. I don't believe that it's going to be the biggest concerns was the airborne thing, passing along of fluids, which we'll get into that too here. I think a lot of the stuff that people were kind of worried about, I don't think there's too much concern. I personally believe from what I'm seeing is the biting and the devouring is an attempt to spread the illness. That you'll see different things in nature that do that. In other words, to spread an illness, a creature may want to in any way get some sort of illness that causes them to bite or scratch or otherwise cause problems that would be able to affection. Same way when you get sick, you want to blow your nose and sneeze. It's a form of transmission and survival. It's the reason that this disease continues to spread, per se. But in these cases, I think the biting and the devouring and the attacks, that kind of stuff is the attempt to spread the illness by its nature. So reports of those being seen, injured, or attacked, and then immediately having the same infection as their attackers, that's been reported. So there are people who have been attacked who have gone through phases where they immediately were infected to a critical mass, if you will, that has just flipped them almost immediately, and now they begin to attack at the same time with the people that just attacked them. Now, I don't know how these reports are coming together. We've gotten various reports from all these different areas, and I think a lot of the information that we have is a clutter. So I don't believe it's an airborne or even through contact that we have to worry here. We've had doctors working on corpses, and none have reported getting sick, which, although it isn't true in 100% of illnesses that we've researched, I get it. I would say it's the majority of them. I would say a deliberate injury, such as a bite or breach of the skin, is where this transmission is occurring. I don't think you can breathe it in. I don't think you can get spattering in your nose. I don't think if you swallow something, you're going to get sick. People don't realize how much your internal system is a volcano that eats everything in its path. So I don't believe any illnesses that are going in that way. So that really does leave the only option of saying that, once you get something into your skin through a break or a breach. I would say a deliberate injury such as a bite or breach of skin is what we see most. And no matter what you do, practice caution. Total turnaround time from infection is hard to tell, but this could be minutes to hours to a day, and that depends on the condition when you were infected. If you have already a pending condition, some people were just talking about HIV and other issues like that. Those could cause issues or allow this to spread a lot faster. And I think that's really where we're going to see some of the most relevant information, especially with people with compromised immune systems, for instance. So, as for what I'm about to say, it may not be for everyone. So, and especially if you have kids that tune in, which I certainly hope you don't, even then you may not be ready for what I'm about to say. So, ready? The truth is, I don't think that there's any way back once this illness has taken hold. I think the damage to the brain is too far gone, and although they can function bodily, we have to ask about quality of life. Like a patient that's on a respirator, sometimes once they have the brain damage there, you just simply pull the plug. And I'm not promoting euthanization. Or even taking matters into your own hands. So let's not have anyone allude to that thinking. That's just bad science. It's something that we all signed an oath to protect people as best as possible. But I think if we're going to do that we have to be realistic. And if I'm being realistic, at most, people who don't drink water has 3 days to live. At the most, you had 30 days to live if you don't have food. This isn't going to go for some long haul. They don't have the resources that they need to survive. They don't have the ability to make rational thought to be able to survive. And I don't believe that even if they are attacking for sustenance, that they're getting the necessary sustenance that they need. I think their systems are compromised in ways that I don't think we fully understand yet. But again, we need to do further research. But if you were to be attacked and defending yourself, I think about the only way to stop an attacker would be by causing some sort of massive head injury or by incapacitating someone via limb damage. And that'd be a good example, such as sweeping the legs. Sorry, a little Karate Kid reference there. I'm trying to lighten the mood. It's not really working, but I just feel like talking about this it's getting way too dark for even me, and that's saying a lot. Even with that said, I need to say this isn't going to blow over. You can't just stay home and expect it to get better, or that everybody's going to die in peace, because somebody who's there and you're keeping them in your residence, if they flip their switch, they're going to attack anybody that they have access to, and they are a danger to themselves as well as others, and they could injure others, and they will injure loved ones, and that's something you don't want. It's why these shelters exist. I know that nobody is using these shelters because I've seen them and they're mostly empty. So, look, if whatever you're dealing with these situations, and I don't want to sound callous when I'm saying this, I understand that we're talking about loved ones, we're talking about relatives that are important to you. I get it. It is what it is. It just, you have to take the necessary steps to take care of them and yourself. When someone passes away, we simply do the necessary steps that we need to take care of them, and I think that's something that's going to be important. And the other thing that I think is what's going to come up later, because I do think that people are still housing sick people, is soon it will be made illegal to house anyone that you believe is sick. So my suggestion right now is, instead of forcing those government movements, I think it's, if you believe someone is sick, just do what you need to do. So just don't house anybody. Go to the shelter when you need to. Remember that hospitals are not the places anymore. They're not capable of taking care of this. It's moved to another level. They're doing the necessary steps they can to try to transport people, but it's gotten to that level. So is it, and the other thing too is it a good idea to shelter in place? And for most, I'm going to say yes. If you believe you're in a situation, just find a shelter. You don't want to take action into your own hands, as poor judgment without good training is what usually does not work in your favor, and you put yourself in places that you're going to have regrets later. And I don't think anybody wants to be there. I certainly wouldn't want to be there. And the other thing is, becoming frantic in situations would be definitively problematic, because this is a very dynamic situation. This is unlike a cold where you just simply walk away. This is something where the illness is going to try to track you down, and it's going to try to injure you or hurt you. And the thing is we've had people actually dying from being attacked. So if these people are perishing from being attacked, then there's a bigger problem than just getting sick. So there's an extreme danger here, and I think that's one of the problems that we have, and why CDC, Civil Defense, and all these guys are really kind of walking on eggshells, is because the things that are going to be happening to them, they can't make suggestions that will end up hurting people. So I think that the truth is they're walking on these eggshells because they don't want to say something that could basically come back to haunt them as well. So I think it makes sense, but I still think the idea of, put it out there, tell people, give them a way to take the action that they need, and I think that's poignant here. That we're going to say a lot of stuff that they're not. I know a lot of politicians that are going to argue with me, but this would be a great time to have a gun, or at least a weapon handy at all times. Your grandfather's pocket knife isn't cutting the mustard either. I'm hearing a lot of people who have no firearms training leaning towards things like machetes or longer knives that they can get their hands on that are more capable. I'm sure there's people out there that have swords. Remember that most of the swords that people have are decorative in nature, so they are not able to defend you in the way that you need to. And I listen to myself saying this stuff. I can't even believe I'm saying it. So after looking at all the different things that we have here, when it comes to transmission, when it comes to where this started, I think the reality is we have a lot of questions. I know we have a lot more questions than we have answers. Do I think this is real? Yes. Do I think it's a conspiracy? No. I've heard the reports that individuals are deceased, they're passed away, and that's the reason the way they are. I guess you could flat earth this if you like, but I think it's more than a little far-fetched. The reality is, if you run into someone that far gone attacking, there's probably isn't time for a meet and greet. You get more pressing matters than to check a pulse or get somebody's vitals. And the question really is this real? And the truth is it is real. So I think there's your answer for that. But, and the other thing is, I think it's in people's nature to kind of take these far-fetched ideas and bring them in. And I don't think it's very helpful or conducive to the solutions that we need right now. So, a few times that I say this, but this is absolutely real. What's worse is I think the potential for spread is very high, especially since we don't fully understand the illness or how to deal with it. A lot of people, especially government officials, they think you can just lock your doors and let this ball blow over, and I don't think that's going to be the answer for it. I think we're in for a stark change in life tendencies if this goes for the long haul. We're going to have to make different changes in our lives, potential sacrifices. There's big concerns about what people don't understand about how to feed ourselves, how to keep the supply lines running, to keep the power on, to do these things. We need to be able to arm the people in our lives to understand how to look for things, especially in their daily work routines and life. I know people are trying to go about things normally, but this is something that's going to probably intrude on your life at one point or another. And arming yourself, that might be an option, and I think people will go full survival or try to open up those fallout shelters of yours, but who knows? It's just you might not be taking the steps that you need, and you might be putting yourself in a worse situation by taking the action that you're taking. So I think that a little bit more logical thought has to play into this, and I think understanding fully what we're in before we start making these gut-wrenching decisions are going to be key. But here's the thing, what do I know? I'm just your doctor. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. The news channel's already knocking on my door right now, waiting for me to send it back over to their regular updates, and that's what I am going to do. Thank you for tuning in. As always, I leave with those words of wisdom: don't get sick, especially in the head. See you guys soon.